Have you ever watched a storm gather and noticed one tree that does not bend? While every other living thing bows to the wind, this one stands rigid, defiant, as if its roots are anchored to the very core of the world. What gives it such strength? What secret does it hold? Now, imagine that tree is a person and the storm is a hail of bullets. The opulent silence of Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it felt more like a private museum, was shattered by the splintering of its great oak doors. Three men, clad in black, faces obscured by snarling demon masks, stormed the dining room. Panic erupted like a dropped chandelier, a cascade of screams and shattering crystal. Patrons in bespoke suits and priceless jewels dove under tables, a frantic scramble of wealth and fear. At his secluded corner table, Kaido Sterling remained perfectly still. He watched the chaos with the detached curiosity of a predator observing a panicked herd. His world was violence, meticulously controlled and elegantly executed. This was clumsy, brutish, an insult to the craft. His hand rested calmly on his lap, inches from the cold steel tucked into his waistband, but he made no move. His two guards, positioned discreetly at the bar, were statues of coiled tension, awaiting his signal. He gave none. This was not his fight. Not yet. His gaze swept the room, cataloging reactions, assessing threats, and then it stopped. It landed on her, the waitress, Alara, a young woman he'd barely noticed before, a quiet shadow who moved with a shy, self-effacing grace. She was in the center of the room, a silver tray still balanced in one hand. While the world exploded around her, she stood as still as he did. Her eyes, wide and dark, were not filled with terror, but with a profound, unnerving calm. She simply watched, her breathing even, her posture unchanged. One of the robbers, the largest of the three, stomped towards her, the barrel of his gun a blunt instrument of intimidation. On the ground! Now, he roared, his voice distorted by the mask. She didn't move. He shoved the gun's muzzle against her temple, the metal kissing her skin. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Kaido felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. This had crossed a line. The girl, Alara, slowly turned her head, not to look at the gunman, but to look at Kaido. Their eyes met across the screaming abyss of the restaurant. In her gaze, he saw no plea for help, no flicker of fear. He saw only a question, and something else. Something that felt disturbingly like recognition. Kaido Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of tradition and violence, the reluctant heir to the formidable Sterling Syndicate. His life was a gilded cage of immense power and profound isolation. He commanded loyalty through fear and respect, his decisions shaping the unseen underworld of the city. Yet, an emotional winter had long settled in his soul, leaving him a spectator in his own existence. He felt everything and nothing, a king ruling over a kingdom of ghosts. He came to Aria not for the Michelin stars, but for the anonymity its hushed reverence afforded him. Here, he could be a man eating a meal, not an emperor on his throne. Alara had been his waitress several times. He remembered her now, a fleeting impression of quiet efficiency. She was the type of person who perfected the art of being unnoticed, her shyness a shield against a world she seemed to find too loud. Her colleagues would describe her as sweet but distant, a girl with a past she never spoke of and a future she never seemed to plan for. She did her job with a meticulousness that bordered on ritual and then vanished back into the city's embrace. That was the woman he thought he knew. The woman with a gun to her head was someone else entirely. The robber, enraged by her placid defiance, screamed again, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "I said get down. You deaf." Alara blinked slowly, her focus shifting from Kaido to the man threatening her life. She did not lower her tray. Instead, she spoke, her voice impossibly steady, not a whisper, but a clear, resonant tone that cut through the lingering whimpers of the hostages. You have what you came for. The patrons are compliant. There is no need for this. Her words were a statement, not a plea. The gunman was taken aback, his momentum broken. What did you say to me? He snarled, pressing the gun harder. It was then that she did something that defied all logic. With a fluid motion, almost too fast to follow, she shifted the silver tray. In the same breath, her free hand shot up, not to push the gun away, but to grip the man's wrist. She twisted. A sickening crack echoed through the dining room, sharp and loud like a snapped bone. The man screamed, a raw, agonized sound, his gun clattering to the marble floor. Before his partners could react, she moved again. She drove her knee into his side, a precise, debilitating strike to his floating ribs. He collapsed, gasping for air, the demon mask falling askew to reveal a face contorted in shock and agony. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. The two remaining robbers froze, their own weapons momentarily forgotten. The patrons, peeking from under tables, stared in disbelief. Kaito Sterling leaned forward, his cold composure finally broken by a flicker of utter astonishment. The shy waitress had not just defended herself. She had dismantled a threat with the brutal, economical grace of a trained professional. The winter in his soul felt the first, unfamiliar tremor of a coming spring. The wail of distant sirens finally broke the spell. The remaining two robbers, their confidence shattered, grabbed their fallen comrade and scrambled out the way they came, disappearing into the night. The immediate aftermath was a low hum of shocked whispers and shaky relief. Police officers and paramedics soon flooded the space, their methodical procedures a stark contrast to the visceral chaos that had preceded them. Kaito's men, led by his stoic second-in-command, Vance, had already secured the perimeter, their quiet authority superseding that of the local law enforcement. They moved with an efficiency that made the uniformed officers look like amateurs. But Kaito's attention was singular. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for the still point in the turning world. He found her by the service station, not giving a statement, not trembling with delayed shock, but methodically picking up shards of a shattered water glass with a dustpan and brush, as if she were merely cleaning up a minor spill. He dismissed Vance with a subtle gesture and walked towards her. The metallic click of his dress shoes on the marble floor seemed to announce his approach. She didn't look up until he was standing directly in front of her, casting a long shadow over her work. That was unexpected, Kaito said, his voice a low baritone. She finally raised her eyes. Up close, he could see the deep, intelligent light in them, a stark contrast to the demure persona she wore like a uniform. Things are not always what they seem, she replied, her voice soft but firm. Her hands, he noticed, were perfectly steady. Who are you? It was a direct question, a demand from a man unaccustomed to being denied. She straightened up, holding the dustpan, her expression unreadable. My name is Alara. I'm your waitress. A ghost of a smile touched Kaito's lips, a rare occurrence. You are much more than that. He watched her for a long moment, the mystery of her pulling at him with an intensity he hadn't experienced in years. He wanted to unravel her, to understand the source of that impossible calm, that hidden strength. He took a heavy, black metal card from his jacket pocket. It bore a single, embossed silver dragon, the crest of the Sterling Syndicate. He didn't offer it to her. He placed it on the clean surface of the service station beside her. I have more questions, he stated. It was not a request. It was an expectation. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving the card gleaming under the dim restaurant lights, a silent summons from a world she had clearly tried very hard to leave behind. Alara's apartment was a small, sparse sanctuary on the fourth floor of a pre-war walk-up. It was meticulously clean, containing only what was necessary: a bed, a small table, a single chair, and shelves filled with books on philosophy and history. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, nothing to betray a past or a connection. Her life was a fortress of discipline, built brick by brick to keep the world out. Her evenings were spent in quiet reflection, a stark contrast to the violent efficiency she had displayed. That part of her was a ghost, a former self she had locked away. The incident at the restaurant had rattled the door to that cage. She stood in her small kitchen, Kaido Sterling's card heavy in her hand. She knew who he was. Everyone in the city's shadowed corners knew of the Sterling Syndicate and its cold, brilliant leader. The card was not an invitation, it was a leash. To call him would be to acknowledge the part of herself she had fought to bury. To ignore him would be to invite a different kind of trouble. A man like that did not tolerate being ignored. The decision was made for her the next evening. As she walked home from her shift, a black sedan, silent as a shark, pulled up beside her. The back window glided down, revealing Kaido sitting in the shadows. "Get in, Alara," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She hesitated for only a second before complying, sliding into the plush leather interior. The car smelled of old money and power. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city lights a blur outside the tinted windows. "You didn't call," he finally observed. "I had nothing to say," she answered, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "You have a unique skill set for a waitress," he countered, turning to study her profile. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" She remained silent, her jaw set. He didn't push. Instead, he changed tactics. "I'm offering you a job. Head of my personal security. The pay will be more than you make in a decade at that restaurant." Her answer was immediate. "No," Kaido raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her flat refusal. No one said no to him. "Why not?" "I'm not for hire," she said simply. "And I can protect myself," he saw it then. It wasn't defiance born of arrogance. It was a statement of fact from a woman who knew her own capabilities. This was not a power play, it was a boundary. For the first time in a very long time, Kaido Sterling was faced with something he could not buy or intimidate. He found the experience utterly captivating. "Very well," he said, a new, more patient strategy forming in his mind. "Then allow me to ensure your safety as a gesture of gratitude. The men who attacked the restaurant will not simply forget what you did." He was offering a different kind of cage, gilded with protection instead of employment. She knew it was a test, a chess move. And for reasons she couldn't yet articulate, she decided to let him make it. Kaido's investigation into the robbery at Aria quickly confirmed his suspicions. The execution was too precise, the entry and exit too clean for common criminals. It was a message designed to look like a random act of violence while demonstrating a capacity to strike him in his personal territory. He tasked Vance, his most trusted and ambitious lieutenant, with uncovering the source. Vance had been with him for years, a sharp and calculating man who had risen through the ranks on a tide of loyalty and ruthlessness. Yet, his report on the robbery was strangely dismissive. A crew of strung-out amateurs who got lucky, Vance had concluded, his tone final. They've been dealt with. The explanation felt hollow, a lie wrapped in a convenient truth. Kaido saw the discrepancy between Vance's casual summary and the disciplined terror he had witnessed firsthand. A seed of distrust was planted. In the meantime, he used the pretense of her safety to draw closer to Alara. He sent a car for her each day. He had meals delivered to her apartment. He would appear at the end of her shifts, waiting to walk her home. At first, their conversations were brief and guarded, a verbal sparring match. But slowly, the walls began to crumble. He found himself speaking to her about the crushing weight of his legacy, the isolation that came with the crown. She listened with an empathy that was both startling and soothing. In return, she offered small, fractured glimpses of her own past, not of what she did, but of why she stopped. "There's a cost to that kind of life," she told him one evening, nursing a cup of tea in her small apartment while he stood by the window. "Every action creates a debt. Eventually, you have to pay." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just a warrior in hiding, but a woman seeking peace. The cold, empty rooms of his life began to feel warmer when she was in them. He invited her to a private dinner, not at a restaurant, but in the penthouse of his skyscraper headquarters, a place few outside his inner circle ever saw. They sat across from each other, the glittering city spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. There was no pretense, no power dynamic. They were just a man and a woman, two solitary souls who had found a rare point of connection in the violent chaos of their lives. Kaido felt the ice around his heart, thick for decades, begin to melt. For Alara, the feeling was more terrifying. She had built her fortress to keep people like him out. Now she was willingly letting him inside. Vance watched Kaido's growing preoccupation with the waitress with a simmering resentment. For years, he had been the untouchable right hand, the one Kaido trusted implicitly. He saw himself as the true guardian of the Sterling Syndicate's future, a future that required a leader of unflinching, cold-blooded pragmatism. In his eyes, Alara was a contaminant. She was making Kaido soft, distracting him from the hard-edged realities of their world. He saw the late-night conversations, the shared meals, the way Kaido's entire demeanor shifted when she was near. It was a weakness, and a weakness in the leader threatened them all. More than that, it threatened Vance's own ambitions. He decided to escalate. If Kaido would not see Alara as a liability, Vance would provide a more forceful demonstration. He orchestrated a second incident, far more personal and brutal than the first. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was a quiet, targeted attack. Two men, professionals this time, ambushed Alara in the narrow alley behind her apartment building as she left for work. They moved with silent, deadly intent. But Kaido, his distrust of Vance already simmering, had placed his own covert surveillance on Alara, a small team of his most elite guards, men loyal only to him. They were hidden in the shadows, waiting for a threat he felt was inevitable. The resulting confrontation was swift and savage. Kaido's men intercepted the assassins, and the alley became a blur of motion and muffled violence. Alara, far from a damsel in distress, reacted instantly, disabling one of her attackers herself before Kaido's team even engaged. The fight was over in seconds. One assassin was dead, the other captured and bleeding on the pavement. The message, however, had been delivered. It was a direct challenge to Kaido's authority, an attack on something he had claimed as his. When he arrived on the scene minutes later, the cold fury in his eyes was absolute. He looked at the would-be assassin, then at Alara, who stood breathing heavily but unharmed, her face a mask of grim resolve. The pieces clicked into place with chilling certainty. The botched robbery, Vance's dismissive report, and now this highly professional hit. It all pointed to one source. The betrayal was a physical blow, a shard of glass in his gut. His closest ally was his hidden enemy. He looked at Alara, the woman who had inadvertently walked into the crossfire of his life, and knew that their fragile, budding connection had just been forged into something far more dangerous. Kaido brought Alara to his penthouse, the safest place in the city. The panoramic windows, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like the glass walls of a fishbowl. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his movements sharp and precise, betraying the storm raging within him. He handed one to her. Her hand was steady as she took it, This wasn't random, he said, his voice flat and hard. The men who attacked you were sent by someone trying to send me a message. He watched her face for any sign of fear, but found only a familiar, resolute calm. The message is that I am your weakness, she stated, her perception as sharp as ever. He didn't deny it. They are right. My interest in you has been noticed. It's being used against me. Against us. He paced the length of the vast room, the weight of his next words heavy on his shoulders. I can make you disappear. A new life, a new identity, anywhere in the world. You'll be safe, completely untraceable. It's the only way. He stopped and faced her, his expression a mixture of command and quiet desperation. It was the greatest protection he could offer, but it felt like a surrender. It felt like losing her. Alara took a slow sip of the whiskey, the amber liquid a stark contrast to her quiet intensity. She set the glass down with a soft click. I don't run, she said, her voice low but unwavering. I spent years building a life where I wouldn't have to. I will not be chased back into the shadows because some man in your organization sees me as a pawn in his power game. It was a declaration. The dynamic between them shifted, the last vestiges of their former roles, boss and waitress, protector and protected, dissolving completely. They were equals, facing a common enemy. For the first time, she offered him a piece of her past, not as a confession, but as a credential. I was an intelligence operator for a government agency that doesn't officially exist. I specialized in dismantling threats from the inside. When I left, it was a choice. I wanted peace. She met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a fire he had only glimpsed before. But if they bring the war to me, I will finish it. In that moment, Kaido felt a surge of something more powerful than admiration. He was not just protecting her. He was standing with her. Her refusal to be a victim was not a complication. It was their greatest weapon. Then we fight, he said, the decision solidifying between them. But we do it my way. On our terms, a dangerous, high-stakes alliance was forged, born not of necessity, but of a shared, unyielding spirit. The plan they conceived was elegant in its audacity. They wouldn't just expose Vance. They would orchestrate a scenario where he would hang himself with the rope of his own ambition. Kaido understood his lieutenant's psychology perfectly. Vance's ego was his fatal flaw. He needed not just to win, but to be seen winning, to prove his superiority over the man he served. So, they would give him the stage he craved. Kaido began to feign the very weakness Vance accused him of. He became withdrawn, seemingly lost in his concern for Alara, canceling meetings and delegating major decisions to Vance. He created a power vacuum, an irresistible temptation for a man like him. Alara, in turn, played her part with masterful subtlety. She became the reclusive, frightened woman Vance wanted her to be. Rarely leaving the penthouse, her public appearances ceased. She was the perfect, isolated damsel, Kaido's Achilles heel. Meanwhile, in secret, they prepared. The penthouse became their command center. They worked late into the nights, mapping out strategies, anticipating Vance's moves. It was a partnership of two distinct but complementary minds. Kaido brought his intimate knowledge of the syndicate's inner workings, its protocols, its loyalties. Alara brought a clinical, outside perspective, a knowledge of psychological warfare and tactical deception that left Kaido in awe. They moved in sync, a silent language passing between them as they leaned over blueprints and communication logs. He learned the rhythm of her breathing when she was deep in thought. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture that betrayed his concerns. The tension of their dangerous game was a crucible, burning away everything but the raw, honest core of their connection. They were preparing a trap, using Vance's own network against him. Kaido discreetly fed false information through channels he knew were compromised by Vance, suggesting a secret meeting to transfer a significant portion of his assets, a move that would signal his intent to retreat from power with Alara. The bait was a meeting at an old, abandoned waterfront warehouse, a classic setting for an underworld power play. It was a location Vance himself had secured for the syndicate years ago. He would feel in control. He would believe Kaido was walking into his domain, broken and ready to be disposed of. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on the final act. The night of the meeting was cold, a biting wind sweeping in off the water. The warehouse loomed in the darkness, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised, purple sky. Inside, Vance stood with a dozen of his most loyal men, his posture radiating a smug confidence. He had meticulously planned this moment. He believed Kaido was coming alone, a desperate man ready to abdicate his throne for a woman. He saw this not as a betrayal, but as a necessary coup to save the organization from sentimentality. The heavy warehouse doors groaned open, and Kaido entered. He was alone, just as the false intelligence had promised. He walked into the center of the vast, dusty space, his hands empty, his face a mask of weary resignation. "Vance," Kaido said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I trust your arrangements are satisfactory." Vance smiled, a predator's grin. "They are, Kaido. I'm glad you've finally seen reason. The syndicate needs a strong leader, not one distracted by attachments." He gestured vaguely, as if Alara were a triviality. "She is not here. She is safe," Kaido said, playing his role to perfection. "This is about us. About the future." It was the opening Vance had been waiting for. He launched into a monologue, a self-aggrandizing justification of his treachery. He spoke of Kaido's perceived weakness, of his own superior vision, of the necessity of his actions. "You lost your edge, Kaido. She made you weak. I am simply restoring order." As he spoke, a subtle click echoed from the catwalks above. Vance's men looked up, their weapons rising. But it was too late. From the shadows, figures rappelled down, Kaido's elite guard, moving with silent precision. Simultaneously, a section of the warehouse wall slid aside, revealing Alara. She was not the frightened woman of Vance's imagination. Dressed in practical black tactical gear, she held a compact submachine gun, her stance perfectly balanced, her eyes cold as steel. Vance's face contorted in disbelief and rage. "You," he snarled, realizing he had walked into an elaborate trap. His men opened fire, and the warehouse erupted into a symphony of chaos and controlled violence. Alara moved with a lethal grace, not as a brawler, but as a strategist, her shots precise, disabling, creating openings for Kaido's men. Kaido himself drew his weapon, engaging Vance directly. At the height of the battle, Vance, cornered and desperate, triggered his final gambit. He pulled a detonator from his pocket. "I wired this whole place," he screamed. "If I go down, we all go down." As every eye turned to Vance, a faint red appeared on Kaido's chest, a sniper, positioned outside. Kaido saw it and instinctively moved to shield Alara. But she was already a step ahead. She fired a single, precise shot not at Vance, but at a high-voltage conduit above his head. Sparks rained down, shorting out the warehouse lights and, more importantly, the receiver for the detonator. In the split second of darkness and confusion, she tackled Kaido, pushing them both behind a stack of crates as the sniper's bullet tore through the air where he had just been standing. The betrayal was exposed. The trap was sprung, and Vance's reign was over. In the aftermath, the warehouse was secured. Vance, stripped of his power and his pride, was taken into custody by Kaido's men, his fate sealed. The external sniper was neutralized by a perimeter team Alara had directed into position before the confrontation even began. Every contingency had been accounted for. Alara had a shallow graze on her arm from a ricocheting bullet, a minor injury she treated with a detached efficiency that belied the life and death struggle they had just survived. Back in the silent sanctuary of the penthouse, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet intimacy. Kaido gently took her arm, his touch surprisingly tender as he examined the bandage she had applied. The cold, impenetrable mask of the syndicate leader was gone. In its place was a man looking at the woman who had not only saved his life, but had shown him what it meant to have a partner who was truly his equal. "I was a stone," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show, content to sink to the bottom of a cold, dark river. "I thought that was strength." He looked up from her arm, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You showed me that true strength isn't about being impenetrable. It's about having someone, worth protecting." It was the closest he could come to a declaration of love, a raw, unvarnished admission from the depths of his guarded soul. Alara felt the last of her own fortress walls crumble. She had spent years cultivating solitude, believing it was the only way to find peace. But the quiet she had with him was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with an unspoken understanding, a shared strength. "You're not a stone, Kaido," she said softly, placing her uninjured hand over his. "You were just waiting for the spring." In the days that followed, Kaido moved with swift and decisive purpose. He purged his organization of Vance's loyalists, not with a bloody civil war, but with surgical precision. He restructured the syndicate, cutting away the more parasitic elements, shifting its focus. He was still a man of power, but that power was now guided by a newfound clarity, a moral compass he hadn't realized he was missing. The final scene of their story did not take place in a boardroom or a battlefield. It was a month later, in a secluded Japanese garden he owned, a hidden gem in the heart of the city. Cherry blossoms, vibrant and full of life, drifted on the spring breeze. Kaido and Alara sat on a wooden bench overlooking a koi pond. She was no longer wearing a waitress's apron, and he was not flanked by guards. They were simply a man and a woman, their pasts acknowledged, but no longer holding them captive. He had offered her a world of wealth and power, but she had asked for only one thing: peace. And together, in this quiet garden, they had finally found it. The storm had passed, and the two trees that had refused to bend now stood together, their roots intertwined, stronger than they had ever been apart.